The flight to Washington, D.C. looked like any other on the surface. Families shuffled through the narrow aisles, business travelers tucked their laptops under their seats, and tired children leaned against their parents. But in C-12F, a man sat with a story no one around him could have guessed. His name was Daniel Cole. To most, he appeared to be just another weary single dad, traveling with his 6-year-old daughter Emma, who clutched a worn-out stuffed rabbit to her chest. Daniel's eyes were tired. His hoodie and jeans made him blend into the crowd, but his silence, the way he carried himself, held a weight that spoke of another life. 3 years earlier, he had buried the love of his life after a tragic accident, and since then, every breath he took had been for Emma. He had traded in adrenaline-filled nights and skies that knew his name for quiet moments of lullabies and school lunches. He wanted that old world locked away forever. But fate doesn't always respect the walls we build. High above the clouds, Emma stirred from her nap and whispered, "Daddy, do you miss Mommy?" Daniel's heart clenched. He kissed her forehead and whispered back, "Every single day, sweetheart. But we're strong, because we have each other." She gave a sleepy smile, trusting her father's words as children always do. Then the intercom crackled. The captain's voice was tense, unnaturally so. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received orders to alter our course. Please remain calm and seated." Nervous murmurs spread. Outside the windows, shadows moved, and then passengers gasped. 2 F-22 Raptors appeared, sleek and deadly, gliding into formation beside the commercial airliner. Why would fighter jets escort a passenger plane? Fear rippled through the cabin. A child cried. A businessman muttered about hijackings. But Daniel simply tightened his grip on Emma's hand, his face unreadable. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, pale and breathless. She stopped in front of him, scanning his face as if searching for confirmation. Then, in a hushed voice meant only for him, she asked, "Sir, are you Daniel Falcon Cole?" The name hung in the air like thunder. Passengers went still, listening. Daniel's jaw tensed. He hadn't heard that name, Falcon, his old call sign, in years. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. The attendant's breath caught. "The pilots need confirmation. They said if you're here, they need to know." Daniel glanced at Emma, who was watching him with wide eyes. His voice came out low, almost reluctant, but firm enough to echo. "Yes, Falcon, United States Air Force, 125th Fighter Wing." Gasps erupted. The cabin was no longer filled with strangers on a routine flight, it was filled with witnesses to something extraordinary. Outside, the Raptors tilted in a precise maneuver, their wings slicing the air. Then, in perfect unison, both pilots snapped their jets into a salute. Not for the airliner, not for its passengers, for him, the man in C-12F. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, why are they saluting you?" Daniel's eyes softened as he looked out at the fighters, memories crashing back, missions flown under fire, comrades lost, impossible odds beaten. His voice was steady, but his chest ached. "Because, sweetheart, sometimes the past doesn't stay in the past." The plane touched down, not at the civilian airport, but at Andrews Air Force Base. Military vehicles surrounded them, soldiers lined the tarmac, waiting. Passengers pressed against the windows, staring in disbelief. And then Daniel walked off, Emma's tiny hand locked in his, into a wall of salutes. Men and women in uniform stood at rigid attention, not for a general, not for a president, but for the quiet man who had once led them through skies filled with fire. Emma's little voice broke through. "Daddy, why are they all looking at you like that?" Daniel knelt, brushing hair from her face. "Because once, a long time ago, I flew with them. I kept them safe, and now my job is keeping you safe." She hugged him, and for a moment, the legend called Falcon disappeared, leaving only a father. An older colonel stepped forward, his voice rough but warm. "Falcon, we thought we lost you to civilian life forever." His eyes studied Daniel with respect, almost pleading. "We didn't call you back. But it seems the sky itself did." The soldiers whispered among themselves. They spoke of the mission that had made him a legend, the time he had flown into a deadly ambush and pulled an entire squadron out alive. They remembered the man who had risked everything, the one whose name carried weight across every briefing room. But Daniel's gaze was steady. "I left because my family needed me. And they still do. My mission now isn't in the cockpit. It's right here." He lifted Emma into his arms. The colonel didn't argue. He only nodded, and one by one, the soldiers lowered their salutes, not out of disappointment, but in respect for a different kind of courage. For a man who chose fatherhood over glory, love over legacy. As the sun dipped low, the F-22s roared overhead one last time, peeling away into the horizon like shadows saluting their leader one final time. The passengers from that flight would tell the story for years, that they once sat beside a living legend who revealed himself not through medals or combat tales, but through the way he held his daughter's hand. And Emma, as she grew older, would understand. Her father was more than Falcon, the call sign that made fighter pilots stand at attention. He was the man who chose her above everything else. Because real strength isn't always found in the skies we conquer. Sometimes, it's in the family we choose to live for.